right, this will be juror number 90.
He's indicated a request for private conversation, Your Honor. Questions 6 and 8 on page 13.
Afternoon, come on up. Have a seat. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Couple things before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys. First, to note that you did indicate a need for privacy for some, so we're going to respect that. We'll probably take care of that first, but a couple of preliminary questions. Well, first of all, let me swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you. That was a great help to get us started. Was everything true on that questionnaire?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Was everything true on that questionnaire as far as your answers?
Yes.
Okay. As you sit here right now, any changes or additions to that questionnaire?
I don't believe so at this time.
Okay, and that's a very general question. What we find is that because of the passage of a few months, that many jurors find that, on reflection, that some of the things they say could be wrong, or they need to add certain facts, or maybe even their opinions have evolved. And so, if anything like that comes up, I just want you to feel comfortable saying something different or additional that was not in the questionnaire. Okay?
I understand.
All right. You were not supposed to read any newspaper articles or really any news through any media about this case. But we understand it's been a few months since the questionnaire. You may have been exposed inadvertently because there have been a lot of news about this case. Can you think of anything you've been exposed to since you filled out the questionnaire and today as far as news information?
The only news that I can recall reading about this case since I filled out the questionnaire was awareness of the fact that jury selection was proceeding.
All right. In fact, I forgot to say, your voice is nice and strong, so it's not a problem, but we have plexiglass in front of you and between us, and also plexiglass in front of the attorneys. I'll keep my mask on, but if you wanted to remove your mask either for comfort or to speak more clearly, feel free to do so. I'm kind of leaving that in your hands. And even if you do remove it at some point, you can put it back on. It's totally up to you. But in any case, did you hear about any related cases, parties, lawsuits, anything like that since you filled out the questionnaire?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. The whole point of this being that just about everybody who has filled out the questionnaire has heard something about the case. Some of it might be accurate, some of it might not be, but we don't expect that you've not heard anything, or even that you have not formed an opinion. It's perfectly fine to form opinions based on what you've heard. What you have to do, however, if you're a juror, is to put all that aside. Decide this case just on the facts and just on the law that I give you. Some jurors will say, I can do that. Others will say, either A, I'm not the type of person who can do that, or I read so much and know so much and have been so firmly entrenched in my opinion that I can't be that person. So that's the whole point of asking the questions about what you know. At this point, do you think you could be fair and impartial?
I do.
Okay. Can you decide the case only on what you hear and see in the courtroom?
I believe so.
Okay. The lawyers are probably going to press you a little more on that. let me ask you an easier question. Do you recognize any witnesses on the witness list?
No.
Okay. And this trial is going to be about 4 weeks long once we start on March 29th. Does that work for you, or can you make it work with your personal and professional life?
Would I be expected to sequester during that time?
It's a possibility. We're not planning on it during the trial. Definitely sequestered during deliberations.
Understood.
Okay, possibly during trial, but that's not the plan. But if things happen that we have to, we have to.
I believe I could.
Okay. Then I'm going to find under the rules that there are items on your questionnaire that require more private conversation. So what I'm going to do at this time is, under the rules, find that these are deeply personal items that need discussion off audio. So we will go off the audio. Nelson to ask some questions.
Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to ask you a few questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit better, and then I'm going to focus on some of your responses to the questionnaire, okay?
Understood.
I'm not trying to trick you or anything of that nature. I'll obviously read what you wrote for purposes of your recollection as well as the record, okay?
Understood.
All right, so let's assume you and I were to meet in a different circumstance. We met at a party or some social event, and we strike up a conversation. What are a couple of things I'm going to learn about you during that conversation?
Likely that my job. I work as an IT systems administrator, and my love of tabletop games.
Okay, great. When you received, you obviously had heard about this case beforehand, right? Before you knew you were a potential juror.
Yes.
And I think based on your questionnaire, you followed it quite closely. You and your friends followed it quite closely.
Yes.
All right. And then you received this packet of information in the mail, and you learned that you were a potential juror on this case. What was your first response to that?
A deep breath, running my hands through my hair, and swearing quietly.
Okay. Why that response? I mean,
This is a very high-profile case, one where being involved in it at all, even as a potential juror, has made me feel somewhat concerned for my well-being, and because the idea of being involved in a high-profile case like this is a daunting responsibility.
okay. So what about your personal safety? I mean, why were you concerned about your personal safety?
Because, with all due respect to this court and its proceedings, I assume that my identity is stored in some electronic record somewhere, and from my job I know that no electronic record is completely safe. And frankly, I feel that whichever way this case is decided, a lot of people are going to be very angry about that.
Okay. Is there one verdict? There's two possible verdicts, right? Guilty or not guilty. Is there one verdict that you think would draw a more a response that would put your safety in greater jeopardy?
Yes.
Would you would that concern or that fear affect your ability to reach that verdict?
No.
Okay. So I believe, based on your answers from your questionnaire, that you would be more concerned that if there was a guilty verdict, of who may present you with harm.
Can you clarify the question, please?
Sure. Based on your answers in the questionnaire, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I believe that you feel that if you were to convict Mr. Chauvin of these offenses, the likelihood of harm is greater.
Yes.
Okay. So from people who might support Mr. Chauvin, they would present you with a greater risk.
Yes.
And so my question is, sitting here right now, can you foresee yourself voting not guilty?
Voting not guilty? Yes.
Okay, so you understand that that's a possibility,
Yes.
and guilty is a possibility as well.
Yes.
And so your concern, let me ask you this, when you got to the government center this morning or earlier today and you saw the fortifications and the army and all of that stuff, what was your reaction to that?
I felt very nervous, even as someone who I knew was required by law to be here. I felt very nervous passing through that.
Okay. Did you feel in any way safer, or did it make you more concerned about your physical safety?
In one respect, I felt safer because I knew I wouldn't need to worry about the possibility of some unforeseen actor coming in from the outside and disrupting things. On the other hand, it makes me feel a little more concerned simply on the grounds that it makes me feel that clearly the government feels all these precautions are necessary.
Okay. And you may disagree with the necessity of these precautions?
I think the precautions are probably. I understand I understand why the government chose to put these precautions in place. I do not necessarily disagree with that necessity. It's just that it implies to me that there was some reason they believed why it was necessary.
Okay. When you heard that we're doing everything we can to preserve your anonymity, did that alleviate any of your concerns?
Yes.
Now, at some point, when the judge deems it safe to do so, do you understand that your identity could be released?
Yes.
And we don't know when that is. The court will determine that when it's safe. Does that cause you concern?
It does cause me concern, yes.
And for the same reasons you stated before?
Yes.
Essentially, that if you were to find Mr. Chauvin guilty, you may become a target yourself.
Yes.
So the back to the original question is, if you were deliberating in this case, would you be able to set aside your concerns, analyze the evidence based on what comes in during court, and issue a verdict based on the law and the evidence?
Yes, I would.
In your personal or professional life, can you think of a circumstance where you've been called upon to resolve conflict?
Give me a minute while I think. Yes, I can think of a couple such cases.
All right. So when you're tasked with that, how do you approach that process? How do you resolve conflict between two people?
Generally, the way I would resolve conflict between people would be to try to find common ground, try to cool tempers, or to make sure that my first goal would be to try to clear up any misunderstandings, and then to establish common ground between the parties who are in conflict, to break up tension by lightening the mood.
Okay. So you understand that this case is fraught with conflict. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And it's obviously, in a broad sense, it's the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin. You understand that?
Yes.
And that's ultimately a conflict that you're going to have to, if you sit on this jury, resolve.
Yes.
But But in the more immediate sense, if you were a juror on this case, you would be in the deliberation room, and conflict between two people or conflict involving yourself may arise. Do you think that there's a difference in how you approach conflict if you're a member or a participant in the conflict versus an outside observer being asked to resolve that conflict?
Yes, there is.
And what is that difference?
External conflict, I find it's much easier to approach with perhaps a critical or dispassionate eye, as I explained. Internal conflict, with an external conflict, I tend to try to remain impartial. With internal conflict, that's generally not an option to the same degree.
Okay.
So I have to weigh which side of the conflict I find more compelling.
Are you willing to re-examine your position based on the input of others?
Yes.
Are you willing to stand your ground if you're so convinced that you're right?
Yes.
Can you think of a situation in your life where you've been confident that you were 100% correct, only to later learn that you were wrong?
Absolutely.
And how do you approach that?
I try to approach it with good grace. In my hobbies, doing design work, I often find that my initial intuitions, the way I've described it to friends and colleagues, is I will be absolutely convinced I am right. You will tell me I am wrong, and 48 hours later I will tell you that you were correct the whole time, and I don't see how I could have ever believed otherwise.
Okay, fair enough. Now, ultimately, again, if you were a juror in this case, the judge is going to tell you what the law is at the end. You have to decide the facts of the case and how the law applies to the facts as you decide it. You may read the law, and you may disagree with the judge. You may think, that can't be right. Or you may think, we really need to change this law. Can you apply the law to the facts of this case based upon the evidence presented in this court alone, even if you think the law is wrong or should be changed?
Yes, that's the responsibility of a juror.
So I'm going to ask you a few follow-up questions on your questionnaire, sir. Again, everybody who has been here has been exposed to this case to varying degrees, and so we're not questioning that at this point. All right. But ultimately, we have to decide if you are the right juror for this particular case. All right. So you were asked a series of questions about, or there were some questions about a video that went viral and became news. And you said you've never seen this video.
That's correct.
All right. Have you seen any parts of this video on news or still photos of this video? Anything about this video that you've ever been exposed to?
I believe I've seen still photos of it.
Okay. Like on internet news websites and things of that nature?
Yes.
But you've never, you have never watched any portion of this video?
Correct.
All right. So would you agree with the general premise that words have meaning?
Yes.
Would you agree that sometimes the words we choose to use are reflective of our thoughts, opinions, or beliefs?
Yes.
All right. You were asked to describe what you had heard about this statement, and you wrote, George Floyd was a black man accused of passing a counterfeit bill to purchase cigarettes. He was accosted by the police, and after an argument was pinned to the ground. Chauvin placed his knee on Floyd's neck and kept it there for over 8 minutes while Floyd protested that he could not breathe. That's the first part of what you wrote. Why did you choose the word accosted?
don't know off the top of my head why I wrote that at that time. Thinking about that choice of words now. I don't know I can give you a definitive answer.
Okay. I mean, would you agree that the word accosted infers an evil intent?
Most likely, yes.
You wrote that despite Floyd's pleas, which stopped after he lost consciousness, approximately 5 minutes in, Chauvin continued to pin Floyd to the ground until someone pointed out to him that Floyd was dead. And you've just gleaned this from news articles and conversations with friends, correct?
Yes.
Not watched the video.
Correct.
You were asked about your impression of Mr. Chauvin, and you checked the box very negative. And when asked, when asked why, you wrote, "I do not see how an officer could justify causing the death of a nonviolent alleged criminal well after he ceased to pose any credible threat." Remember writing that?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about that. First and foremost, you have formed an impression that a very negative impression of Mr. Chauvin.
Yes.
And you have formed the impression that Mr. Chauvin caused Mr. Floyd's death.
Yes.
And you formed an impression, at least as it relates to Mr. Chauvin, that Mr. Floyd was a nonviolent alleged criminal.
Yes.
Now, with respect to Mr. Floyd and your general impression of Mr. Floyd, you wrote, "As I understand, Floyd was not a threat, and his alleged wrongdoings certainly did not merit the use of lethal force." That's what you wrote. So, again, you have formed an opinion or an impression that the force that was used in this case was lethal.
Yes.
When asked about your conversations with family, friends, or coworkers, or whether you've posted anything online, you checked yes. Let me ask you first, have you posted any opinions online?
Regarding this case?
Yes.
No, I have not.
But what you have expressed to your friends, you have expressed a sympathy with the protesters and their cause, and have discussed the militarization and systematic racism of policing in America.
Yes.
So, again, you have... Your opinions are your opinions, and I do not invalidate your opinions by my questions. I'm trying not to invalidate your opinions by my questions. But obviously, you have formed strong opinions about this case. Agreed?
Yes.
You have formed an opinion that Mr. Chauvin caused Mr. Floyd's death.
Yes.
You have formed an opinion that the amount of force that Mr. Chauvin used against Mr. Floyd was in and of itself lethal force.
Yes.
You have an opinion that policing in America is systematic racism, or involves or incorporates systematic racism and an over-militarization of the modern police force.
Yes.
So your views are strong. Agreed?
Yes.
There's what's called the presumption of innocence. You're familiar with that?
Yes.
Right? You understand that Mr. Chauvin does not have to testify.
Yes.
You understand that Mr. Chauvin is not required to present a single shred of evidence in this case.
Yes.
You understand that we don't have to ask a single question.
Yes.
And at the starting point, right? The starting point is Mr. Chauvin is presumed innocent.
Yes.
So my concern, and you believe that you can be fair and impartial in this case.
I do.
Okay. So you've got these strong opinions,
Yes.
right? You can set all of those opinions aside, right? Your beliefs about policing, the cause of death, the use of force, all of those things that you've already decided and formed opinions on, you can set them to the side and be fair and impartial.
May I clarify rather than giving a simple yes or no?
Sure, please do.
The issue at my role as a potential juror in this case is to be a potential trier of fact. My moral judgments, as I was asked before, regarding the law and the nature of policing are not relevant to the question of fact in the eyes of the law, which would be my responsibility as a juror.
Okay. So, despite all of that, right? I mean, you have you watch certain pieces of evidence in this particular case, or you learn about certain training methods of the Minneapolis Police Department, or you learn certain medical information, right? That's the evidence that comes in this case. You would just simply abandon your beliefs about the over-militarization of the police when you see training videos of them pinning people to the ground or whatever? You don't think it shapes your ability to impartially try this case?
Again, I don't believe that it would necessarily affect my core convictions, but again, my opinions of what the law is and of what the system of policing in this nation is are not relevant to the question of whether the prosecution proves beyond a reasonable doubt whether the defendant has committed the crime of which he is accused.
In the questionnaire, you were asked to rank your opinions up to various kind of broad or blanket type statements, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Do you recall that exercise in this questionnaire?
Vaguely, yes.
So I want to just cover a couple of your opinions on these. The statement reads, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be, and you strongly disagreed with that notion. Can you explain that?
I believe that racial discrimination, for example, is a serious problem in this country. That we see examples of this in the media, but I don't know if I would say it's necessarily worse than the media. Makes it out to be. But I believe that they're certainly not underplaying it.
The statement reads, blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you strongly agreed with that.
That's correct.
And is that based on personal knowledge, talking with friends, studies? Like, what leads you to the belief that you would strongly agree with the notion that minorities do not receive equal treatment?
That's based on reports that I've read in the media, discussions of studies of prison populations, of sentencing for drug offenses, for example, the difference in how neighborhoods with various ethnic compositions are policed, and so on.
The statement says, police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, and you strongly disagreed with that.
Yes.
So let me put it to you this way. Simply because a police officer pulls over a minority person, is that discrimination?
Not in and of itself, no.
But it's your position that it happens more to minorities simply by virtue of a discriminatory act.
Yes, or that the likely outcomes are likely to be worse.
So that if you are a minority, you have a higher likelihood of it ending tragically.
Yes.
And the question reads, or the statement reads, police in my community make me feel safe, and you somewhat disagreed with that. Why?
Well, in mostly in light of everything that's been going on surrounding this case and related events. Also simply the fact that to be perfectly blunt, I'm always a little wary of anyone with guns being in my general vicinity.
Okay. The question or statement reads, I do not trust the police, and you strongly agree with that.
That's correct.
So you understand that there's going to be a lot of police officers that testify in this case.
Yes.
You understand that the majority of those people who testify will be called by the government.
Yes.
And so when you say you mistrust or do not trust the police, and that you strongly agree with that proposition, can you take the word of a police officer who testifies under oath in this case?
No, I cannot.
The court like to inquire further?
Mr. Slusher, would you like to inquire?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, I'd like to follow up on that line of questioning. You've indicated that you have a fairly strong mistrust of the police. True?
Yes.
But if you could imagine a situation where you have a police officer testifying to an event, not necessarily an opinion, but an event, like the light was green, versus a bystander testifying as to the same event, and let's say the bystander says the light was red. Now, solely based on the person being a police officer versus a bystander, do you think that you would tend to believe the police officer more or less simply because they're a police officer?
It would depend on what the circumstances were.
And what would some of those circumstances be?
If, for example, to invert your example, if a police officer were to say that the light had been red when another police officer had pulled someone over and a bystander said the light was green, therefore, if the second police officer who were testifying this were covering for the first police officer by saying that the light was red, I would be more inclined to trust the bystander. If it were an issue where the fact that they were a police officer was incidental, I don't believe it would color my judgment one way or the other.
And let's say it's just simply the example of the police officer versus the bystander, but the police officer was standing 5 feet away from the light. The bystander was standing back, 100 feet from the light. Would you tend to believe the police officer or the bystander?
Again, it would depend somewhat on the circumstances, but I think I'd be more inclined to believe the police officer in that circumstance.
And why is that?
Because they were closer to the event. They were at the heart of it. It's much less possible that they could have been innocently mistaken.
And so it sounds like from your answer, it would depend on the circumstances, not necessarily that the person was a police officer or not a police officer, but it would be based upon, say, their opportunity to see the event?
That would be a big part of it, yes.
There may be other factors unrelated to there being a police officer that would cause you to favor one witness over another?
Yes.
And the real question here is, if you were called and selected to be a juror in this case, would you honestly, in all honesty, be able to set aside any preconceived bias you have about any occupation, a police officer or not a police officer, and judge the case solely based on the evidence and not on your preconceived notions? Would you be able to do that, or would you struggle with it?
I would attempt to judge the case as best I was able based on the evidence. However, I believe part of the instructions I was given were that it would be my my role to judge which evidence was most credible, and it would factor into my weighting of evidence in that regard.
And so if following the instructions and you knew that you had to make a credibility determination, do you believe that you would not be able to set aside some opinions that you hold about police officers and judge their testimony on the same level as any other witness? You would not be able to do that?
I do not believe I would be able to do so. That's correct.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Juror 90, I'm going to excuse you from this panel. The deputy will take some paperwork from you, but thank you for all your very candid answers here and also for filling out the questionnaire. We appreciate your service. You won't be called in on any other cases, so you are removed from jury service completely.
Understood.
Any
Thank you,
questions?
Your Honor.
All right,
No.
take that. Have a good day. This will be juror 91, first one of the afternoon. We have to do all four, yeah.
For the record, I was making a motion for cause.
Yeah, the motion was implied for cause. I think he clearly fell within the case law and police credibility. The reverse of Logan, essentially. All right, this is the group advisory again. And then number 91. Off the record, Mr. Slisher, I was assuming that you would. Hey, good. You can be seated. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Excellent. I'll also be asking you some questions. If the answer is yes, just raise your hand, but we'll get to that. First of all, my name is Pete Cahill, and I'm one of the judges of the district court. And you have been summoned as potential jurors in the case of State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. A person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions to all the prospective jurors, which must be answered under oath. First, thank you for filling out and returning the questionnaire in the mail. We appreciate the information that kind of gives us a good head start. But your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best served by your continuing to provide full, complete, and honest answers to the questions that you'll be asked today. And as I said, those questions are going to be under oath. Now, the questions you're going to be asked are probably going to follow up on some items in the questionnaire, but probably other topics will be covered as well. So after the questioning is over, the attorneys may excuse you from the jury, and I might excuse you for what we call cause. In either case, it does not mean that you're not a fair person, and you should not take offense in being excused. Also ask that you not take any offense at any question that is asked. We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore some opinions you might hold and to hear about some of your experiences that might affect your ability to serve in this case. Now, the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. In the normal course of a trial, charges might be added to or subtracted from those charges, but those are the charges as it stands today. To the charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. And I'm now going to have the participants introduce themselves, the purpose being to see if you have any acquaintance or friendship with them or professional relationship. So, beginning with the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Slisher, and I represent the state of Minnesota.
Hello, my name is Christina Marinakis, and I'm assisting with the prosecution.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Elliston, and I represent the state of Minnesota.
Good afternoon, Aaron Eldridge for the state of Minnesota.
Hey, Mr. Nelson, if you'd introduce your client.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Nelson. Along with my associate, Amy Voss, we represent the defendant, Derek Chauvin.
Does anybody on the panel recognize any of those people or have a relationship with any of those people? If so, raise your hand. All right, juror in the corner. What is your juror number? 9-1. Okay. Who is it that you know?
I don't know. I just know the name.
Okay. So is this something that you know that you've seen some of these people before, maybe on the news or something?
Yes.
And you're indicating yes. Okay, I think we'll get to that in individual questioning then. Anybody else? Anybody know other members of the Attorney General's office who might be present in the case? Specifically, Matthew Frank or Jerry Blackwell or anybody else who works in the office of the Attorney General. Okay. Anybody who knows anybody who works with Mr. Nelson in his law firm or had any business dealings with his office? Okay. You have been given a copy of a list of potential witnesses. I'd like you to review it before you're questioned individually. You'll be asked if you know anyone on that list. Now, one of the things the attorneys may not do in jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I do want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence, and they create no inference of guilt. No member of the jury should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made against him or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. If you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given a witness's testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect. In determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, the relationship to the parties, ability and opportunity to know, remember, and relate the facts, manner, age and experience, frankness and sincerity or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury, you should rely in the last analysis upon your experience, good judgment, and common sense. There are certain things that you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigative. You are not to go out and do any looking, and you're not to ask people about this matter. You are not to use the internet to look for information about this case or about the law. Above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved, the lawyers or the witnesses or spectators. Do not be offended if any of those people do not speak to you. They know it would be improper to contact you during the trial, except through the normal selection process, and generally will confine themselves to a brief greeting. During the selection process, your family and friends will be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them that you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, or other social media to announce that you are a potential juror in this case or to comment on this trial. You may access such social media tools, avoiding news articles, I hope, but please do not publish any information about the case or your thoughts about the case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about the case, and do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about the case in the newspapers or online or in social media, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or any other juror will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom. You will only be referred to by your random number to protect your privacy. The audio of anything you say will be broadcast, unless we need to discuss something that is deeply personal, extremely sensitive, embarrassing, or would tend to specifically identify you. In those cases, I will specifically order the audio to not be broadcast. In that case, you will still have to answer questions on the record, but without audio or video broadcast. Essentially, only the audio could be heard by people that are in this courtroom. Now, with the exception of juror number 91, I'm going to have the rest of you wait in the other courtroom. Feel free to use all the hand sanitizers and sanitary wipes you wish. We're trying to maintain COVID protections, so please keep your masks on and distance. I took my mask off just so you could hear me on this. I'll be returned to wearing it when you are individually questioned. So with that, except for juror number 91, if you could go with the deputy. Sure. Hold on just a second. Just have a seat right there. All right. I'm going to start with a few things. Number one, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath. You raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right. First question. You filled out a questionnaire, gave us a lot of good information to start with. Is everything on the questionnaire true?
Yes, it is.
All right. Any changes or additions to the questionnaire?
No, sir.
Okay. And that's a very broad question, but we understand, in fact, it's been very common for the jurors who come here today and the other days we've been in selection, that in the intervening months they reflect and they realize maybe there's some things I should have changed or added to, or maybe even some opinions have evolved. And so they want to give a different answer. Just want you to be comfortable with the fact giving a different answer than what was in the questionnaire is absolutely fine. If it's the honest answer, full, complete answer, that's what we want, even if it's different. So you have explicit permission to say things other than what's in the questionnaire and to be different from it. This is more likely to come up actually when the lawyers ask you questions, because they will direct you to specific questions and maybe ask about your answer several months ago. They are likely to read both the question and the answer to refresh your recollection. They're not trying to be confrontational or to imply anything about your answer, just so that you can kind of remember what your answer was. Because you don't have a copy of your questionnaire, do you?
Yes, I do.
Oh, you do? You are number 2 of all the jurors who've kept a copy of their questionnaire. Congratulations. So in any case, they might still read it to you just so that you can refresh recollection.
Okay.
You weren't supposed to read any articles. The questionnaire advised you against following any media coverage about the case, but we realize it's been fairly prevalent in the media, and it's been several months. Have you become aware of any information about the case or related cases since you filled out the questionnaire till today?
Just the announcement of the settlement.
Okay, and what specific details do you recall from that?
Just the number 27 million, I think it was. I don't know what
Okay,
it was.
I'm going to ask you to pull a little closer to the microphone, only because
Just the amount of the settlement. I didn't read any details, just
the headline, right?
just the headline, yes.
And they put the amount in the headline. Do you recall what the amount was?
I think it was 27 million, if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken.
All right, great. One other thing is, we have plexiglass between us, plexiglass in front of you, plexiglass in front of where the lawyers are going to ask you questions. I only point all that out, and I'm going to keep my mask on. Just to give you permission, if you wish, with all those protections, it's permissible that you take your mask off if you want. Yes. Totally your okay. Didn't take a lot of convincing. Yeah, if you ever want to put it back on, feel free. I kind of leave the mask or unmask up to the individual juror.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Any other items you may have heard about in the media?
No.
Okay. Let me talk about that settlement then. I think you indicated in your questionnaire you could be fair and impartial in this case.
Absolutely.
Now, when you've heard about that settlement after you filled out the questionnaire, has that moved the needle for you? Do you think it would well, now I think I might not be impartial. I might be leaning one way versus the other. What do you think?
Not at all. It hasn't changed.
Okay.
No.
What effect do you think it had on your decision, if you have one as a juror in this case?
I don't think it had any effect, 'cause once again, I just don't have any details.
Okay. And if it doesn't come into evidence, which it won't, it's not part of this case. Different parties, different issues, different decisions to be made. All those are different and they aren't part of this case. Can you put aside what you've heard about that in deciding this case?
Absolutely.
And really it comes down to everything you've heard about this case. Everybody's heard something. And the question is, can you put everything you've heard aside? You know, some of it's accurate, some of it's not accurate. But can you put it all aside and put aside any opinions you may have formed and decide this case just on what you hear in the courtroom based on the evidence and the law that I give you?
I believe that I can, yes, sir.
Okay. Excellent. Did you recognize any witnesses on the witness list?
None.
Okay. And we have a trial that's going to be about 4 weeks long. Do you think that you can make that work for your personal and professional life?
I will make it work.
Okay. We understand it is burdensome the longer a trial gets on everybody's life, but you think you can make it work?
I can make it work, yes. It's a challenge, but it's workable.
Yeah, and I think I've stopped asking people, is that okay? Because, well, in some ways, no. But I'm glad you can make it work. There's something I want to ask you about, but to get to the specifics, it may involve leading to information that might identify you specifically. Basically, you know someone in the Minneapolis Police Department, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Would you mind if I gave you a pen and paper, if you wrote down that name so I can share it with the lawyers without the world hearing who that person is?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Who's dinging, by the way? Who's dinging?
Me.
Okay. As long as I know who it is. You're allowed. They aren't. Okay. I'm going to have my clerk share this with the lawyers so that we don't have to say it on the record. And part of the reason we're doing this is if you identify the person, that might make it easier to identify you. And we are doing everything we can to protect your anonymity.
I appreciate that.
Now, when they talk about the relationship and how often you talk to that person, please feel free to, in fact, I'd encourage you to be general. Because if, for example, if you give enough detail that someone can figure out who that person is, again, it's too close, it might come back at you. So with that, when the lawyers are there, and I'll ask this question while they're conferring. That person's name was not on the witness list, am I correct?
It was not.
Okay, great. All right, then as I'm going to turn over the attorney, so as to juror number 91, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. Sorry, I got to adjust after taking off the mask. I have a few questions for you generally that I'd like to just get to know you a little bit better. And then from there, I'm going to follow up and ask you some questions about your responses to the questionnaire. Would that be all right with you?
Yes.
All right. So if you and I were to meet under different circumstances, a more casual conversation occurs, it's our first conversation, what are a couple things I learn about you after I walk away from that conversation?
You would learn that I'm a grandmother,
Congratulations.
couple of grandchildren, and I enjoy taking care of my family.
Okay. Do you get to spend a lot of time with your grandkids?
Absolutely.
Great. You had obviously heard about this case before learning that you were going to be a potential juror, right?
Yes.
And had conversations, maybe saw some things on the news, right?
Right.
What was your impression when you received this packet of information and you were identified as a potential juror on this case?
What was my impression?
Yeah. What was your reaction?
My reaction? I guess I was kind of excited to possibly have an opportunity. Never served on a jury before. I feel strongly about it being my civic duty to do so. And so when I received the information, I was proud to complete the questionnaire and send it back.
Okay. So exciting to fulfill your civic duty, and especially on a high-profile case. Or
I didn't really think of it as a high-profile case, just to fulfill my civic duty.
okay,
Have that opportunity, yes.
fair enough. Did you have several jurors have said that they had some concerns about their personal safety, physical safety, COVID? Did you share any of those types of concerns?
First, the only concern I really had was COVID, but since I've been vaccinated, and there's a year behind us, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable. I'm getting into the routine of keeping this mask on hand and social distancing, so I have no concerns at this point.
Okay, great. I'm jealous of your vaccination. When you got to the government center today, have you been downtown since preparations for this trial started?
I have not been downtown in years.
Oh, okay. When you got down here today, however, what was your kind of reaction to the fortifications, the military, the fencing, all of that stuff?
Frustration, because I circled the block about 5 times trying to figure out how to get in, because it wasn't the same as it used to be.
Right.
And it looked like construction going on. And as I drove by slowly for the 5th time, I kind of saw through the fence an armed guard. And so I slowed down, and he very nicely pointed me in the direction and actually walked while I drove. And there was a magic gate that opened, so I was afraid I wasn't going to make it on time because I couldn't figure out where
Where
to
to go.
park. Yeah,
Excellent. Again, I don't think you're alone in that experience.
yeah, it was quite an experience.
So, can you think of a time in your life where you have been called upon to be to resolve a conflict between people? You have kids, grandkids, professionally. Can you think about a time like that?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So when you think about the word conflict, it generally, would you agree, involves 2 other people, or 2 people, or 2 or more people, perhaps?
Generally, yes.
Okay. Do you think it's different if you are personally involved in a conflict versus simply being asked to observe a conflict or resolve a conflict?
I suppose it could be different. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you approach a situation where you are being asked to resolve a conflict between 2 people?
I am being asked to resolve a conflict.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the question again?
What tools, how do you approach that? What's your methodology involved in resolving conflict between two other people?
Two sides of the story. I need to hear both, get all the information, the details, the facts, the feelings, and then proceed accordingly.
Okay. How do you think it changes if you're one of the people involved in the conflict?
If I'm one of the people involved, once again, I need to think about the facts, try to think about how I can resolve the conflict if I did anything that really helped fuel the conflict, and how I might help resolve it.
Okay. So you understand that the role of a juror is essentially about conflict resolution.
Yes.
And obviously there's a conflict between the state of Minnesota on one hand and Derek Chauvin on the other hand. That's the global conflict, right? But then if you were selected as a juror in this case and you're in the jury deliberation room, you may be involved in conflict yourself, or you may be called upon to help resolve conflict between others. Do you think that you can apply those same principles in the jury room?
Absolutely. I feel like I do it every day with 2 grandkids.
Yeah, those grandkids will do it to you. But now let's take a kind of a really broad abstract, right? You understand there will be lots of evidence that's introduced in this case. We're expecting this case to take 4 weeks, roughly. People will testify, and some people will remember or perceive things differently than you remember or perceive things, right?
Right.
So what tools do you bring to kind of that analysis to say, how do we figure out a just result here?
The facts. Go back to the facts. What was presented, what happened, and exactly what are the facts.
Okay.
It has to be based on the facts, yeah.
All right. Wonderful. I'm going to venture a guess that perhaps with your grandchildren, this may have also come up, but do they ever lie to you?
Oh, yes.
How do you tell if someone is telling you the truth?
Well, they're pretty young, so you can usually tell. But
Right.
For the older one, just look her in the eye, let her know that I know that she's not being forthcoming, and it's not appreciated, and it's good to be forthcoming.
Okay. So in terms of, can you think of a situation you've got 2 people who may perceive an event at the same time, right? Do you think that, and they have 2 completely different stories about that event, do you think that that automatically means that one or the other is lying?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
think their perception is their truth, so we just have to work harder at getting to the common truth.
And I know you have a background in psychology, right? So the question being, if 2 people are perceiving the same event, what types of things would you think might affect their perception of that event?
Possibly experiences they've had in the past. Any moral thoughts or moral things that they feel, or convictions that they have, possibly could affect it.
Okay. What about a particularized training or lack of particularized training?
I'm sure that could influence it also.
Right.
Absolutely.
So perhaps a medical doctor will look at a situation, someone having a medical emergency, differently than a nurse. They both have a medical education, right? Would you agree with that?
They both have a medical education, basic, yes.
And they may perceive something differently despite having medical education, right?
Yes.
And one person who has a lot of training in something may perceive it much differently than someone who has no training. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that again, is necessarily that one or the other is lying about what they perceive?
No.
Okay. Can you think of a situation where you've been 100% convinced that you're right, only to later learn you were wrong?
All the time with my husband.
It's usually the husband saying that about the wives, right? How do you approach that? I mean, what do you know, other than apologizing to your husband, or maybe not apologizing? I don't know.
Usually an apology and providing the evidence of, why he was right and I was incorrect.
Okay. So you can take what you learn and apply it to future situations?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you one more question about the deliberation room. Are you the type of person who will simply agree with someone else just to build consensus, or will you dig your heels in, stand your ground?
Normally, I would pretty much dig my heels in, stand my ground, try to make sure my opinion and my point of view is heard until someone can dismantle it.
Okay. Now, last general question, which is, at the end of the case and when all the evidence is presented, the judge will instruct you on the law. And you may read the law and you may go, that's wrong, or I think that should be different. You may disagree with the law. Can you apply the law as the judge gives it to you based upon the facts as presented in court, even if you think it's wrong or should be changed?
Yes, that would be my duty, yes.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm just going to follow up with a few questions for you, ma'am, on your questionnaire. I, again, appreciate you taking the time to fill this out and the thoroughness of your answers. Again, you were asked a few questions, and I believe you indicated that you had seen a video on the internet of the interaction between Minneapolis Police Department and George Floyd, right?
Correct.
And I think you said that you had checked the box that you had seen that video one time.
That is correct.
And I'm going to ask you, I want to make sure we're kind of talking about the same video. It's a video that was taken by a bystander. It got uploaded into social media and then went viral, became a news story. Is that the video that you saw?
Correct, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
And there were also some body-worn cameras or some security cameras that were introduced into the public sector. Did you see any of those?
No, I did not.
Okay. And so I think we're probably talking about the same video, which is a video taken by someone watching or observing the arrest.
Correct.
All right. And when you say you watched that one time, did you watch it in long form, or did you see like a clip of it on the news?
Didn't see it on the news. I guess it would be in long form, maybe, if I'm understanding what long form is.
Well, a longer, X number of minutes, not 30 seconds or a minute or 40 seconds. I mean, longer than, let's say, 5 minutes.
I think I probably watched it for about 4 to 5 minutes.
Okay. And is there a reason, did someone send that to you? Did you see it on social media? If you didn't see it on the news, how did you come about that video?
It popped up on social media, I believe.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And did you, is there a reason, did you shut it off mid-video?
I did.
Why?
It just wasn't something that I needed to see. As I shut off quite a few things, in the news. I seldom watch the news.
Okay, great. You were asked a series of questions about your impression or your general impression of Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd. Mm-hmm. And your opinion as to both of them was neutral. You wrote with respect to Mr. Chauvin that there are two sides to every story and I don't know all of the details. I don't want to misquote you. Why do you think, are there specific details you think you're missing? Why do you think that there's more to know about this story?
Because I just don't know. I don't know what I don't know. There's a video, there's rioting in the city, and, I just know the surface.
Okay.
I don't know anything other than that. I don't know.
Would you think it's important to get more information before you could make a decision?
I think more information would be very helpful.
You were asked about Mr. Floyd, and again, you said, I don't know him, and I don't have an opinion of him one way or the other. Are there things that that you would learn that may change your opinion of him? Not that his character is of relevance, but...
I don't think so, no.
Okay. You were asked about whether you've had conversations with friends, family members, coworkers, or discussed Mr. Floyd's death on social media. Did you ever post anything on social media about this case?
No, I did not.
Okay. But you said you discussed it with your family right after it happened. We talked about how the incident happened in the neighborhood you grew up in. So you must have grown up in Southeast Minneapolis, I'm
In
assuming?
South Minneapolis, yes.
South Minneapolis, okay. And you were asked a question of whether you believe your community was negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since George Floyd's death. And you wrote, yes, my community has been affected.
Yes.
How has it been affected?
It's been affected by the fact that so many stores were looted, and destroyed. I have a brother that has medication sent through the post office, and a few days later he called and said, they were in the post office. How am I going to get my medication? So things like that.
Okay. Do you think there were any positive impacts as a result of the protests?
I think some people may have come together and helped each other or helped businesses get back on their feet. Helping people that can't get their medicine, people that need food, things like that. Those are the positive things that I feel took place.
So I'll just ask you kind of a common theme that's emerged in terms of this discussion is there a difference between a protest and a riot?
I think there is.
Okay. How would you define the difference?
I think a protest, you're actually protesting against something that you strongly believe in. A riot, I believe, is an intent to harm and destroy, and possibly not listen or see. Yeah.
So in terms of the protests versus the riots, right? I think you've described that your brother had some problems with his medication, and that was a negative impact to the community. And then when you describe people coming together and helping, is that more associated with the protests, or is that simply kind of trying to clean up after the riots?
A tricky question. I think it's more associated with the protest.
Okay. And that's positive. That has had a positive impact on the community.
Yes.
Okay. Now you have a relative who is a Minneapolis police officer, right?
Yes, I do.
Have you spoken with your relative about this case at all?
No, I have not.
Even before you were summoned as a juror?
No.
Okay. Do you talk to your relative frequently?
No, I do not.
I mean, are you close with him or her?
No.
So you haven't seen, do you see them maybe once a year, or just haven't seen them even in years?
Well, I see this person, this relative, maybe, I would say 4 times a year, maybe 5.
Okay. So you're in contact, but you're not super close.
Exactly.
Have you ever spoken with him or her about his or her job?
No.
Okay. They've never described, this is kind of what it's like doing this job.
No.
If you were to be a juror on this case, and the policies and training of the Minneapolis Police Department or aspects of the police department were the subject of this trial, right, which is probably the proper subject of the trial, would you call this person up and say, hey, this is what they're telling me is going on, and should I believe this?
No.
Okay. Does the fact that you have a relative in the Minneapolis Police Department specifically, given that this case involves the MPD, does it specifically cause you to have bias for or against either party in this case?
It does not. I'm really proud of my relative for standing up and being a police officer.
Good. You were asked a series of questions, statements. They were actually more or less just kind of statements, right? And you were asked to rank your agreement or disagreement with them on a scale of strongly agree over to strongly disagree. Again, do you generally remember those, or remember doing that or engaging in that exercise?
It's been a while. I genuinely.
Yeah. And you did keep a copy, I forgot.
Yes,
right?
I do have a
Yeah.
copy right here.
Okay. The statement is, there is a statement that reads, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be, and you circled no opinion. Why did you circle no opinion?
Because I just don't know, or what I do know of the media, which is very little, I know the media can exaggerate things or it can downplay things. And so I don't know.
Okay. There is a statement that reads, blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you somewhat agreed with that.
Somewhat.
Why?
Once again, just what the media portrays. Just for an example, with this resurrection, there were some people that, of course, were arrested. And I think I saw that someone was given permission to go on vacation as opposed to, let them out of jail to go on vacation. And I just kind of wondered, who gets to do that?
Okay.
No.
Are you talking about kind of what happened at the Capitol
Exactly,
in
right,
Washington?
right, at the Capitol, yes.
Okay.
So.
And someone was released. I haven't heard. I haven't been paying attention to the news of late. Someone was released and allowed to go on vacation.
I believe so.
And I'm presuming that person was white.
I believe so, yes.
And you don't think that other minorities would get that same treatment?
Some may.
Okay. Do you think it's more economic driven versus, or is it more racially driven?
I think it's probably more economic driven.
You were asked, or the statement reads, police in my community make me feel safe, and you somewhat agreed with that.
Yes.
What about police make you feel unsafe? If you don't strongly agree, you only somewhat agree?
I don't feel like they make me feel unsafe. I do feel like they are there to protect the community, and I appreciate that. So I truly don't feel unsafe. My answer to that, I'm not sure what my thoughts were at that time.
Okay. You were asked a question, because law enforcement officers, I should say the statement reads that because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess decisions they make while on duty, and you somewhat disagreed with that. Why? And if you need me to reread that, I can.
Please do.
Certainly. Because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess decisions they make while on duty.
And I agreed with that, you're saying?
You somewhat disagree.
I somewhat disagree. I think officers have to have the power to make the best decision in that moment.
Okay. And that it's possible that there are circumstances where they should be questioned?
Yes.
I mean, I think, would you agree that there are decisions that officers make that are along a spectrum of decisions, right? So an officer is driving, he sees someone, he's observing them, he has time to pull that person over, right? That may be something that's a little bit more subject to question, right? Because he has a conscious long period of time to make that decision.
Yes.
Or let's make it more nefarious. If an officer is only pulling over African American people in a suburban area, it would be okay to question that officer's decision making. Agreed?
I would agree with that, yes.
Right. Conversely, officers at the other end of the spectrum oftentimes have to make very rapid decisions. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And sometimes they may even get those decisions wrong because they're human. Would you agree with
Exactly,
that?
right.
Should those decisions be questioned in the same way as the questions about a longer-term conscious decision-making process?
I think they should possibly be questioned. It could help with next times, could help see it differently.
Okay. And that's fair. I appreciate your comments on that. You were asked a couple of questions in terms of both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And with respect to Black Lives Matter, you had a very favorable response, and you wrote, "I am black and my life matters."
It does.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with like the more organizational or political organization Black Lives Matter?
Not real familiar, no. Just know what I've seen and heard.
Okay. Now, in Blue Lives Matter, you had a more neutral approach or view of them, and you say everyone is important, and my family member is a police officer.
Correct.
So you'd agree with, I guess, the premise that all lives matter.
Yes.
Fair enough. You have a son-in-law who is a physician.
Yes, I do.
If medical testimony were to become important, would you call your son-in-law and ask him for his opinion?
No, I would not.
Okay. You were asked, I promise you I'm almost done. You were asked a couple of questions about your opinions regarding the justice system, and I have a couple of questions. The question reads, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And your response was, sometimes. Explain, expand, expound.
Well, I say sometimes because, once again, I don't know the full story. When a story comes out and someone, say, has been arrested or they've been convicted, I'm only seeing what the media is displaying and wants me to read or to know. So I don't really truly know the entire story. So I can only base it on what I hear and what I see.
Sometimes innocent people get convicted, right?
Very true, yes.
You were asked if you want to serve on this juror, and you said yes, and the reason why is because you feel it's your civic duty.
I truly do believe that, yes.
And you believe you can be fair and impartial and judge this case exclusively on the facts as presented in this trial.
Yes, I do.
If I may have a moment, Your Honor. For cause, Your Honor.
Mr. Slusher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror number 91, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How long have you been retired from your current occupation?
About 5 years, I think.
And I noticed that you do some volunteer work without identifying the organization. It appears that it has to do with volunteering with youth. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Can you please share with us a little bit about why you decided to volunteer in that capacity?
I sometimes enjoy working with children.
Tell me about the times you don't.
Sometimes I don't. Depends on the day. I like teaching children, helping them learn, helping them kind of, find their way.
Can you tell me a little bit about the children that you work with, volunteer with?
These are, I want to say it, not underserved, probably a little underserved youth that need guidance, that need help with homework, help with, getting up to reading level. They spend a lot of hours away from home because, the parents work. It's usually a single parent home. And so they come to a place where they know they can get help, support, and they'll be safe and play and get the support and homework help that they need.
Now, is this something that you've done since retirement, or have you done this, other times during your adult life?
I've done it other times during my adult life, but since retirement, I just kind of do it intermittently.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because previously you were in a marketing capacity, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
But for a financial institution.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. But your undergraduate degree was in child psychology.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if the volunteering was out of a desire to use those skills, or
I hadn't thought about volunteering to use the skills. I just felt there was a need for strong adult help in that particular place. And I was available to do it, and I was happy to do it.
well, thank you for doing that. You indicated that in terms of your own experience with the criminal justice system, you don't really have any. Is that right?
In terms of being arrested or anything of that nature?
And that was the basis of your saying, in terms of not really being sure if the system is fair or unfair.
Correct. Yes, I don't have any experience there.
Do you have any friends who have shared other experiences with you that maybe felt that they were not treated fairly?
No, I don't.
And you indicated that you once lived in the area where the alleged crime occurred. Is that right?
Close, within about, I'd say 10 blocks, maybe 15 blocks, yes.
But you've since moved away from that neighborhood.
Long ago, yes.
Approximately how long ago?
25, 30 years?
Okay. Do you ever go back to that particular neighborhood to visit?
No, I don't.
Is there any particular reason why you don't return to that neighborhood?
I don't have any friends or family in that neighborhood. I don't do any shopping in that community. I seldom visit the south side of Minneapolis.
Do you, aside from not having any friends there or any particular stores you like to visit, do you specifically avoid going to that area?
Do I avoid?
Do you avoid it?
No, I don't avoid it. I just don't have a need to go.
Okay.
I have a dentist office that's not too far from there, but it doesn't require me to go into that particular community.
All right. One moment, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions, and we pass for cause.
Thanks. Juror number 91, you are going to be on our jury. And so what we'd like to have you do is come back on March 29th at 9 a.m. That's when we plan on starting the evidence in this case.
Okay.
The deputy will also give you some instructions and maybe take some paperwork from you. But you'll keep the letter that you have because that gets you in here.
Okay. Now that I know how to get in here.
Yeah, that may, you never know, we may, just to mix things up, change that on you. So the jury office will probably be in contact closer to the time just to either remind you, or as you've seen, sometimes we get a little bit of delay here. And so in either case, we'll either remind you that we are starting on that time or have delayed it to a different time, and might give you other facilities and other information.
Okay.
Until then, do you have any questions for me?
I don't think so, sir. Thank
All
you.
right, well, thank you so much for
Thank
going
you.
through all this process and giving us all your honest answers. So
Thank
you can
you.
go with the deputy. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a 20-minute recess, our afternoon break. Thank you.